Hey everyone, it's Charlie Morgan here and welcome to another video. In today's video, I want to give you the standard operating procedure or workflow that I use to pull myself out of a rut. Okay, so by rut, I mean, well, basically being lazy or not doing what I know needs to be done. When you enter a rut, it typically comes from a place of pain avoidance. But there's a lot of reasons as to why we fall into ruts. I'd say the most common one among entrepreneurs is the inability to manage discipline. And what I mean by that is you've got these two sides of you where you're either hyper disciplined or hyper lazy, and you seem to swing between the two, right? You might notice this sort of pattern manifests itself or unfolds in your life where you go really hard for a few weeks or a couple of months with your work, you make great progress, everything in your life is lined up, you feel like a god, right? And then only to find that after a couple months or weeks of that, your body gives you no choice but to relax. Okay, and that relaxation, it manifests itself in terms of you doing things that you regret. You end up cheating on your diet, you stop working, you give into impulses, and you sort of burn yourself out. That's pretty much what happens here. And so today's video is going to give you a actionable process, the process that I follow to pull myself out of ruts. But I want you to know that this process will not work if your rut has been produced from burnout. The only real way to recover from burnout is to recover from burnout. There's no magic trick or thing that you can do to bring your mind and body back to the level at which you then feel like working is actually healthy again. And so one of the main things to do to begin with is to prevent a rut, right? Because prevention is better than cure. To prevent a rut, all you really have to do is just manage your motivations and disciplines and willpower and give yourself some exceptions to not have to be perfect all the time. It's something I've been working on and been trying to sort of nail for a long time, because over the past few years I have been going through this cycle of unbelievable levels of discipline for prolonged periods of time, followed by unbelievable levels of laziness, right, and impulsiveness and stupidness and pain avoidance for long periods of time. And it's a very painful thing to go through, because you've got these two sides of you. You've got the great Charlie and then you've got the weak Charlie, and they sort of battle and fight, and one will win one day, another will win the other, and it's very painful. But it usually comes from, you know, if you feel this urge to do something great and you'll start applying yourself and you're being super disciplined, super motivated, and it's not sustainable, and deep down part of you knows it's not sustainable, but you want to keep going because it gives you so much dopamine and serotonin to make so much progress. But what you want to do early on in your entrepreneurial career, you want to take yourself to the point of burnout a few times, because you want to understand your biological limits and your natural thresholds to burnout. Because what you can then do is you can understand how hard you can go for how long you can go, work-wise and discipline-wise, and then you just bring it back a bit, right? And you work at 60 or 70% of that limit. So you need to figure out how to go consistently for 30 years, not just consistently for 3 weeks or 3 months, when you think more about the long term. And so you need to have this ability to actually manage your discipline. Topic for another day, but the reason I brought that up is because if your ruts are being produced because you're burning out, then this won't help you. This is more for that sort of situation where you've spent a couple of days not really doing what you should do, or you're noticing yourself to start to get a bit lazier, or you're neurotic and you keep checking apps that you shouldn't check, or you're going out and drinking more than you should, or you start cheating on your diet and your work's suffering and you can't seem to pull yourself out of bed. This is more for that sort of situation when you notice that you're not behaving as you should. And it's not motivational. I'm not going to give you a kick up the arse or try and give you some sort of motivational talk or pep talk. I'm going to give you some actionable strategic insights and exact processes that I use to actually get out of this rut. So what I'm going to do now is hop over into some whiteboard software on my laptop with Loom and walk you through exactly what I do. And this is an SOP that I've had to build for myself because I do fall into ruts. We all do. It's natural. Any guru or any business person that you follow that says that they don't fall into ruts is lying to you. It's impossible to not fall into ruts. But the main thing, and the thing that differentiates people who are good from people who are amazing and great, is their ability to pull themselves out of said ruts faster. You're going to fall into them, but it's a question of how quickly you can catch yourself into the rut, which will determine how successful you are. So this video is going to be useful for you if you do find yourself going in cycles of discipline. Let's hop in and I'll see you in there. Okay, people, so here we are in Loom, and I've got 3 topics, right? These are 3 things that I check when I fall into a rut. So what you've got to realize with a rut is that it's almost always going to be cause and effect, okay? a lack of discipline or a period of laziness is an effect, right? It's something that has been created by you, pretty much always, almost always you. It's always your fault. And so what we want to start to learn and realize off the bat here is that an effect always has a cause, okay? And when you fall into a rut, it's really just a question of sort of looking back over the past couple of weeks at your trending behaviors and figuring out what you've done or what you have not done that has led to this specific event, okay? And if you can define the cause, then you can actually address the cause, and it's just like problem solving in business. 99% of problem solving is problem definition. And so the purpose of this little checklist that I'm going to write out here is not actually for you to sort of think, oh, that's cool. It's more for you to think, that's why this is happening. Okay. So a couple of things, and I've got a screen here. So if I'm not looking at the camera, I'm not being rude. I'm not just staring at a wall and talking to myself. I'm looking at my screen. So the first and most important thing here is your goal. Okay. 9 times out of 10, when I fall into a rut, it's because I've forgotten why I'm working, or I've lost sight of what I'm trying to achieve. And so what I want you to think about here is I want you to imagine for a second that you've got over here is your goal. Okay, this is your goal. And this is what you want to hit. Okay, and let's say this is your, I don't know, it could be any goal, 12-month goal. It could be a specific revenue goal, right? You want to make a certain amount of money. Don't know what it is, but my point here is that it's impossible to be productive and to feel like you're making progress if you don't know what you're making progress towards. And it's nearly impossible to be productive if you haven't got anything to be productive for. And so what happens here, and by goal, I don't mean having a goal, I mean remembering what your goal is, or vision, or mission, whatever you want to call it. And so let's say you're here like this, right? And you're all good. And you're looking at your goal. You know what your goal is, right? And for as long as you know what your goal is and you remember why you're working, you will make progress towards that goal because you can see it and you know exactly where it is and what it is and why you want it, and you can remember. And so you can, if you keep your eyes, it's the whole principle of keeping your eye on the prize or keep your eye on the ball, right? You just want to keep focused on what it is you're trying to achieve, and that's that. Now the issue here comes when you're here and you completely forget you have a goal. Now this happens more often than not, and it's very easy to lose sight of your goal. And the reason this happens is not because you've just suddenly forgot that you had a goal. It's because you've been so tied up in the day and so tied up in the week or the month that you've forgotten about the year, or you've been so tied up in the quarter that you've forgotten about the next 3 years. And so this happens when we conform to only thinking about the short term, and we lose sight of the long term, right? It's kind of like business is like driving a car at night, okay? You can only see what's directly in front of you. And if you try to look any further out ahead, then you're going to wrap your car around a tree. So what you need to have in your car is satellite navigation on screen that tells you what moves to make and what direction to go next. And if that satellite navigation turns off, or sat-nav, if that turns off, then you're just driving around at night taking aimless corners and you can only see what's in front of you and you've got no idea where you're going. And you're going to drive for 3 hours and then end up somewhere completely random and be like, why the hell am I here? This is very uncomfortable. But it's because you lost sight of the goal. You lost sight of where you were going, right? And so if you're here, right? Oh, I just took your head off. If you're here and you're like, what the fuck am I doing? I can't remember why I'm working. I can only see, like, my eyesight can only see one day in front, right? Whereas over here, we've got 1 year, and you know you had a yearly goal, but you can only see the day. Then what's going to happen is the events of the day are going to make your mood do this, right? Your mood's going to wildly oscillate because you're living specifically in the day. Now, we want to live in the present. It's a very useful skill to have. If you're thinking about the future, you're anxious. If you're thinking about the past, you're depressed, right? But we want to have this non-binary ability to focus relentlessly on the day without getting stupidly emotional and having our mood fluctuate because of silly little things that happen. Like you send 3 emails, don't get a response, and you start freaking out. That's so irrational. But it happens, and you lose sight of the yearly goal. And so if you're only focused on the day, it's like driving a car at night, like I said. you don't know where the day is going to take you. It might take you here. It might take you here. It might take you towards your goal, but it's just as likely to take you in the wrong way and backwards, right? So that's rule number one of falling into a rut. And the easiest way I found to fix it is to basically just remember what you want from the business and why you're doing it. And then look at all the activities you're currently performing, right? So this is exactly what I do is if I'm in a rut, right, I will write out my goal, right? So for now, for example, it's getting Imperium Agency, our coaching business, to 100K a month, which we should do probably quite soon. And so if I forget what this is, I write it out. And then what I will do is I will list every single activity that I've done over the course of my rut. And I will basically think about the activities that have been productive towards this goal and those that have not been productive and made me regress away from the goal. And then I cut out the ones that have made me regress, remember the ones that have made me progress, and then I know why I'm working. And then I can start to think, what will cause this goal to happen? Oh, discovery calls. Okay, what causes discovery calls to happen? Outreach. Why have I stopped doing outreach? I don't know. Oh, I know. It's because outreach is fucking painful. And as soon as you lose sight of why you're doing it, you have no reason to do it. And your brain finds it hard to justify painful things. It's like Nietzsche or Machiavelli or whatever, whoever said it. He who has a how, he who has a why can justify almost any how or something like that. You know, the ends justify the means is why I'm saying that. So that's rule number one of pulling yourself out of a rut. It's just remembering why the hell you're putting yourself through all that pain in the first place. And a goal basically, it gives you focus, right? It gives you trajectory. It gives you a perceived element of progress, which brings us the most satisfaction and happiness and meaning as humans. I define progress as the actual meaning of life, right? And so if I forget what I'm working for, then I have no idea if I'm making progress or not. And so any action seems difficult to take because I can't actually attribute it to my end goal, and that's just chaos, right? So that's the first thing and the most important one. Now, the second one is dopamine, okay? Now, I want you to understand the principle here, something very, very important to understand, and that is this, right? Dopamine deficit states, okay? So in neuroscience, as you're probably aware, we have a chemical in our brain called dopamine. And dopamine is the chemical that is released when we engage in activity that produces gratification, okay? Makes us happy. So whenever you eat a cheeseburger or whenever you go to check your social media, whenever you feel any element of satisfaction anywhere in life, it's because dopamine has been released in your brain. Now, the issue with this is something called dopamine deficit states, right? And this is where usually when you enter a rut, you start doing things that are stupid. And by stupid, I mean you start engaging in activities that you know are bad for you that bring about instant gratification. So you might find yourself sitting through and watching, 10 episodes of a Netflix show, or you might find yourself 3 hours deep into a YouTube rabbit hole, or you might find yourself scrolling through TikTok for 5 hours. You might be eating junk food. What happens when you do these things is your brain gets accustomed to a certain level of dopamine. Right, it's like putting salt in food. The more salt you put in food, the more salt you need to put in food because it numbs your taste buds. Whereas if you went without salt for a month and then ate something salty, it will taste disgusting because you become used to not having much salt. The same thing applies to dopamine. The more dopamine you're used to and the more instant gratification you're used to, the more instant gratification and dopamine you need to continue to feel it. And so it becomes an absolute disgusting cycle, right? And so this is what I mean by dopamine deficit states. Because if you've just spent the last 3 or 4 days in a rut doing nothing but lounging around, eating Cheetos and watching something on Netflix, then work will feel fucking excruciating. Because the amount of dopamine associated with doing the work is minute in contrast to the amount of dopamine that you receive doing what you've been doing. And so the amount of dopamine that you have right now in your rut is gargantuan. It's huge. This is your brain. This is all the dopamine in your brain, like flying around, making you feel great. And, your brain wants to continue to repeat this behavior because dopamine is a good indicator of survival to our baseline primal, like the amygdala part of our brain that indicates survival. And so you've got all this dopamine in your brain, right? And so when you try, this is you right here, right? And when you try to sit down at a chair, right, like this, I'm going to draw a terrible person here. you try and sit down, it's like it's got scoliosis. You try and sit down to do the work, right, on your laptop, blah, blah, blah. And what happens is your brain is like, what the fuck? Why am I doing this? Like, because this produces this much dopamine here, right? Whereas Netflix and junk food produces this much dopamine. And so we've got this thing where we try to transition our behavior, and this is called a dopamine deficit state, where you go from one activity to another and it's excruciating to do. It's just like eating really salty food and then eating bland food. And the bland food literally tastes of nothing. And you don't want to eat the bland food because you're like, oh, this is gross. And so you might be wondering now, well, okay, question mark, Charlie, how do I fix this? I know that I've been a bit of an idiot for the past few days, and I know this is why I'm in a rut. And the other thing is it's very difficult to see your goal clearly when you have so much dopamine flying around, because your brain doesn't want to focus on anything that isn't producing instant gratification. So the answer to this, and the way that we solve this, is by doing a fast. Okay? And by this, I mean a dopamine fast. This is honestly probably one of the most useful tools that I've ever found in my entire life for dealing with this bullshit. So a dopamine fast, you may have heard of it, you may not have heard of it, but all you want to do for 24 hours is absolutely nothing, right? Get your laptop and your phone and all your food and whatever it is that you would derive pleasure for. You don't exercise, you don't use books, you don't listen to music, you don't watch any porn or masturbate, you don't do anything that produces instant gratification. All you do is lie around on the floor and drink water and maybe go for a walk or two. You don't talk to anyone, you don't watch anything, you don't really go anywhere, you don't really do anything, you just do nothing. And what this does to your brain is it will be fucking agonizing to do, because your brain is like all the way up here, and you'll feel anxious and you'll feel a bit depressed and a bit bored and a bit scattered and neurotic and weird, and it's normal to feel those things. But what will happen after about 24 hours of doing this dopamine fast is your dopamine levels in your brain will go from here, right, and they will drop all the way down to here. And we want this to happen, because what we then want to do at this point, after this fast, is the first thing that you do after 24 hours of no dopamine will produce an insane amount of dopamine. And so if the first thing that you do at this point is go and work, well then guess what? Your brain is going to associate working with a significant amount of dopamine because it's had none over the last 24 hours. And if you want to take this to the extreme, you can do it for 2 or 3 days. If your brain's really messed, really fucked up like this, and you've got these horrific, loops like this, like neurons of instant gratification, and these networks, they take years and years of reprogramming to get rid of. I'm only just getting over mine. I used to be addicted to video games as a kid, from like 14 to 19, from 14 to about 13 or 14 to like 17 or 18, I would just game for like 10 hours a day. And so my brain was fucked. And I had to do a lot of this stuff to get rid of those networks. I haven't played a video game for like 6 months now. But what happens after this fast is you go from extreme state to small state, and then whatever you do initially the next day, you'll be much more motivated to do, because everything will seem much more interesting. So it's a good way to do this stuff. So that's the dopamine thing. Understanding dopamine deficit states and understanding that it's almost impossible to work after like 48 to 96 hours of just raw instant gratification. Like, your brain will just say no. And the only real way to fix that is to just basically take a whole day off of doing that stupid behavior. So that's that. And then body, well, this is straightforward. Diet and sleep. If you're in a rut, I can guarantee leading up to the rut a week before, your diet has been shit or your sleep has been shit. You've got to understand that your productivity and your discipline is an output, and your body is the thing that produces the outputs. Have you ever heard the phrase, we are what we eat? Now, we are what we eat, but we also are what we sleep. Okay, so if you're asking your body to obey you and to perform activities against your willpower, then you have to make sure that you fueled it properly and you've given it the proper recovery it needs to continue to do those tasks. And so when I say fuel, I mean diet. You need to eat a clean diet, right? With no sugar, right? No processed foods, no junk food, all of this crap. Drink nothing but water, get rid of alcohol. If you want to get rid of coffee, you can. It's one of the best decisions I ever made. Just eat clean, because you need fuel and you need to burn a clean flame, and you don't want inflammation in your gut, because then you're going to be foggy and you can't see your goal and you can't have the willpower to do dopamine fasts. So eat a clean diet, get a clean, healthy diet plan, stick to it. And you'll observe that if you're in a rut, it's almost always because your diet has slipped or because your sleep has slipped. The only thing you have to know about sleep is to go to bed at the same time every day and wake up at the same time every day. And after a month of doing that, your brain will be wired to that pattern. And as long as you do those things, you'll sleep fine. Sleep in a cold room, in a dark room where it's quiet. But the main thing about this is just going to bed on time, right? It's not difficult. People think that entrepreneurship and building 7-figure and 8-figure businesses is all about having the fanciest copy and the fanciest funnel and the most advanced metric strategy. But really, it just comes down to sleeping and eating properly, not engaging in stupid instant gratification behavior, and keeping an eye out for why you're actually doing all the shit you're doing. If you do these things, you will leave a rut you're in. Okay. So rule number 1, remember your goal, because your goal will focus you and it will make you realize, like, it will give you the behavior you need to do. Like, a lot of the time when you're in a rut, it's because you've just forgotten what you need to do, right? And you've forgotten what you need to do because you've forgotten why you're doing it. And the brain loves reasons. It's justification. It's reason respecting tendency in psychology. You can look it up. Dopamine, get rid of all the crap in your life. It's difficult to do. It sucks. You'll hate it. And your brain will scream and cry and kick along the whole way, but it's imperative. And then body, it's irrational to ask your body to do like things like that you need them to do, like working and just standing at your desk or sitting at your desk all day. It's a bit of give and take. You've got to fuel it properly and help it recover. And so if you want to get out of a rut, remember your goal, do a dopamine fast, eat cleanly and sleep cleanly. And the best way to get out of a rut is to prevent it. Keep your sleep pattern perfect, keep your diet clean, don't engage in extensive dopamine activities. Obviously, you can watch the odd film or the odd Netflix series. You can do these things, but we can find a balance. But it's just when they overcome us, it becomes a problem. And don't forget your goal. So that's everything, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've used this countless times to pull myself out of countless ruts, and I'm sure I will use it countless times in the future. But the good thing about this is every time you do it, you get a little bit better, a little bit faster. So now I'm at the point where my ruts don't really last long at all, because I notice them, I'm mindful, and it helps. That's everything from me. If you did like this video, please subscribe. It helps me. If you liked it, press the like button. I'm not going to tell you that you have to put the notification bell on, because that would be distracting, and I don't want to distract you from your work. So just check back every now and then. But also leave a comment if you found this useful. If you want to share it, you can do that as well. And I will see you in the next video. I'm also going to link a calendar event in the description. If you run an agency and it's not growing and you're struggling, we might be able to help you. So if you click that link, you'll be taken through to a calendar event. No obligation to book a sales call. And the purpose of this video is not to send you to some sort of bullshit case study funnel. But if you're interested or want to grow, you can use that to talk to us. Talk soon. Cheers for watching.